How's everyone doing out there on a Monday after the holiday weekend? Thanks for joining us once again on Cape Ann Today. Heather and I have another couple of great interviews for you, including Erika Brown. We visit with her every week. She's from the Manchester Cricket. And this week she talks about election drama. Oh yeah, high stakes over there in Manchester by the Sea. Great research about stripers and dentist visits during the pandemic.
We spoke a couple weeks ago about the election in Manchester, and we were comparing it to the election in Essex, which had happened the week before. I don't know if you guys remember, but Essex had sort of a real race at the top, you know, the Board of Selectmen. And it was really interesting because both candidates really engaged in the community. It was really interesting, and it got all the attention. Manchester, by comparison, was sleepy. It's like a sleepy election. A lot of incumbents kind of going for re-election, very few kind of dramatic things. Where there were new seats and new people coming in, they weren't unknown people. People like, you know, John Round, who is well known, especially with the Manchester Historical Museum. He was running for Board of Selectmen. Mark Weld is going to be, re-upping again on the Finance Committee. But really, there wasn't a lot of drama. Ann Harrison on the Board of Selectmen. The only thing I said at the time, and I don't know if you remember this, where I was kind of laughing about it, the only place where there was action was the planning board. And there's 3 slots in the planning board. 2 of them, one was essentially an incumbent. The other one was an incumbent, like a sitting seat. So it was Chris Olney. But in any case, the 3rd slot was the only place with action. And the reason why it was action was because nothing happened. So you had sort of this, vacant, all in caps on the ballot, vacant. And so this guy, Gary Gilbert, who was involved with this effort to study accessory dwelling units. He had done a lot of stuff with the planning board. He had been involved with the master plan, which is very important and has to do with planning. And then he's also an architect, and he was sort of a reasonable candidate. So that was it. And you had said, oh, thanks, Mr. Gilbert, for stepping up. And that was it, right? Well, The next week, we got this candidate out of nowhere, Donna First, who came on it came out of nowhere. And she, too, was a write-in candidate. So you had this write-in candidate face-off for the planning board. It was wild. So, there was a lot of activity on social media and everything. In the end, Gary Gilbert won, but I got to say, he won by maybe 20% more of the vote. She got a lot of votes.
Mm-hmm. What was the divide between them? Was there a contentious issue?
With the cricket, I'm not getting into sort of the drama behind what's happening, to be honest with you, but I will say this from my observation. What you had was, well, I'll tell you this. There were 2 people on the planning board who were kind of in a tacit way behind Gary Gilbert. They wrote into the cricket these sound ideas about experience and about how you shouldn't have on-the-job training. It should be really experience really counts, and that the town is at a very critical juncture, and we need people with chops that are actually relevant for planning board. So, and that was all very proper, right? You don't really campaign for a candidate when you're sitting on the board itself. It's not a good look. That said, there was another planning board member, and I won't say who they are because it's not nice, but they actively campaigned online overtly for this new person. I can't imagine what the vibe's going to be like when they go back in.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's,
wow.
Like my father used to say, act in haste, regret at leisure. When you do something like that, you got to realize that, life's a long dance, as they say, and you've got to work with each other. In any case, I guess the silver lining is people are getting involved, and that's a really good thing. There's a lot of big things happening with the town now, so we need people to get more and more involved. There are like 20 slots of committees that people are looking for. The town is looking for people to step up, so maybe that's an indication that people will start stepping up.
Is that board meeting in person, or are they just sort of zooming through things right now?
No, I was thinking about that. They actually have the Zoom. Zoom is going to be like a landing pad for that board, I think.
Yeah, right.
So when things get back in person, they can look at each other and shoot each other bad eyes. But yeah.
Hey, Erika, you want to talk? Let's talk stripers.
Oh yeah, there's Jim Benke, who lives in town. He is a former science publisher, so he's really, I mean, he's just high quality when it comes to information on nature and natural things. And he's done some really amazing pieces for us on the coyotes of Cape Ann, ospreys, etc. Well, he tackled striped bass a couple weeks ago, and then he had a follow-up this week, both really good pieces. The first piece was back in May, really. It wasn't a couple weeks ago. And it was about, before striper season. And he talked about the new regulations. I don't know if you're aware of this. My husband's a big... he'd say he's a big chunk bait striped fisherman. That's like the bottom of the barrel in the fisherman pantheon of fishermen. No, in all seriousness, you've got your fly fishermen, you've got your chunk bait, and so he does what Jim Benke would call the grip and grin, the picture of gripping your fish that you caught, your keeper, and grinning widely. So really what's going on is the new regulations, because they're really worried about the fishing stocks again. I know in the early 90s, you had to get, I think it was 38 or 36 inches for a keeper. It was a really hard bar to hit. And if you could catch one, and my husband used to say, I think like a fish. And I said, I'm not sure you should boast about that. But anyway, so he was really good. And he'd say, it's very, very difficult to catch them. It's very difficult. It's a smart, lovely fish. So then the stocks were rebounded, and I think it went down to 28 for quite a while. So it went down, it was easier to catch a fish and all that stuff. Well, they're going back up again. And then this year, what they've done really is they've done something very interesting. It's a slot now. And people who fish will know this. This is not new to them. But you actually have to go catch between 28 and I believe it's 38 inches. So it's a slot. It's an air. And what happens is if it's over 38 inches, you can't touch them. And the reason why is females are statistically the ones that survive. Isn't that interesting? The women are the ones that are really smart. So they stick around. And what happens is apparently.
That's what we have to do.
Exactly. They need to stick around. If you have a 44 to 45 inch female, they will produce 3 million eggs, which is 6 times more than a 28 inch fish.
Oh, wow.
So that's why you have a slot. That's why you have it. The other thing they did, and this actually, I'm sorry for such a long sort of intro, but the second thing they said is you have to use a circle fish hook instead of a J hook. And the reason for that is when you catch a fish with a J hook and you have to often either rip it out or cut it loose, you've injured the fish and the fish ends up dying anyway. You may as well have hauled it in. Mm-hmm. Never mind. So what they're doing now, and this is what this week's article from Jim is about, the Department of Marine Fisheries, the Massachusetts State Department of Marine Fisheries, they're doing a study that has implications for the entire region, from the Chesapeake Bay down in Washington, D.C. area, all the way up here, which is really sort of the zone of striped bass. They're doing a study in Salem Sound because it's a really great place for it. And they're putting transponders on 175 stripers. They're catching them and doing it, and they're literally doing all the research to see what are the mortality rates of catch and release striped bass. So there you go.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't done that before, because the striper season, the striper recreational season is so important around here. Well, actually from Maryland to Maine, right?
What I find interesting, I mean, personally, what I love to see, and this is a great example of it, you get technology benefits things like this. You probably didn't do it before because you couldn't do it before. But now technology is cheap enough that you can have something like 25 receiver buoys in Salem Harbor. That used to be the domain of like the federal government. And now local people have access to technology that's pretty accessible and also pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
So
anyway, yeah.
Like more accessible technology. That does it. Thank you, Jim Benke. Actually, I have to ask, so because my husband fishes for bass with lures. So will those lures no longer have a J hook, but they'll have this little circle hook? Do we know that?
That is an excellent question. And my guess is, and I don't know the answer to it, My guess would be that you would not be able to use those lures.
Right.
Yeah. Unless they have a circle hook on them.
So you're also going to talk about dentists, right?
Yes, I think I told you that we've been doing this kind of rolling kind of series on opening up for business and taking a look at different kind of areas of our local economy. It seems like restaurants and retailers in downtown are an evergreen story, right? So I feel like I'm covering that all the time. Last week, I think we talked about health clubs and we talked about the Manchester Athletic Club, but the whole reality of health clubs in COVID. Well, dentists are a big thing too, because if you really think about it, there's so much spraying and what they call aspiration of fluid from your mouth, and that's a real hot spot. So dentists have been massively impacted by this. They've only been allowed as part of the phased, sort of the shutdown to be open for emergency only. And then as of June 6th, they were allowed to be open for regular hygiene visits. And of course, those are important because you got to keep those going. Otherwise, that's how you stay away from the dentist. You go to the hygienist. Yeah. So you stay away from the dentist so things don't get bad. So now it's a whole new kind of protocol. Many fewer patients. Obviously, they're probably the two doctors we spoke to were Dr. Rob Lipkowitz up in Magnolia. He's fantastic. He's been there for about 30 years. Real local guy in terms of his patient base. And then Sophia Martz in Manchester. She's exactly the same way. Been around probably for around the same amount of time. And she's also got a smaller practice, a more boutique practice. It's not the kind of practice where 5 chairs are going at once, So that's actually an advantage for them because you're mandated now to take much fewer patients. You check in outside, they take your temperature. When you go in, you get pre-screened 2 days before your appointment. And then once you're in, you don't have things like spitting and out, rinsing your mouth and spitting. Nothing happens anymore like that. And there's high capacity air purifiers and suction air. It pulls so there's no mist. So yeah, I didn't explain that very well, but that's a layman's explanation.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and I went.
You go.
They could only touch the door handles and open the doors for you. No magazines or anything like that. You got straight into your chair. There was no wait. They were ready for you. And the same thing on the way out. So you're answering all these questions outside the office, then they bring you in and then they escort you out. It's a pretty great experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ask them about accessing the PPP or the PPE? Sorry, I was getting this mixed up. Because it's been difficult, right?
They said that they've had to go way up on PPE. I'm sorry, I just made the same mistake. But also, she said, they change everything in between, gowns, everything. It's very similar to going to an emergency room.
Right.
So everything completely gets changed, totally, top to bottom. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Sophia was saying, I feel bad about the environmental implications of all the PPE, but it's all balancing out because nobody's driving. Let's just say that.
That this PPE is it's not cheap, and all these, medical offices are going to require so much of it, and it's been a problem from the start. So, and I've heard that it's not that easy for a dental office to access it. So, we'll see.
Well, she's not having a problem accessing it, but in terms of both, neither one that we spoke to had problems accessing it. However, it did come up that their productivity is way down because they can only see patients one at a time, but their costs are going way up because they have a whole new protocol now. So what they're doing is they're putting that aside and they're just taking care of their patients. They're playing a long game, and they know that eventually everyone will come back to the dentist because, let's face it, for most of us, the dentist is not an optional visit.
I think this was one of my favorite conversations with Erika. It covered the natural world, it covered a little pandemic and a little politics.
Yeah, it's always fun talking to her, and there's a lot going on over there. It's been cool to learn about Manchester and Essex, and they had different sorts of town meetings this year, and now the fallout from that, how the community is responding to that, write-in candidates, and Yeah, it was pretty fun stuff there too. So we'll be talking to her again later this week and bringing that to you next week. Our second interview today is with the fine folks over at Senior Care. Heather and I have had a great conversations with them ever since the COVID crisis hit. And here's another one all about dementia.
A question we're often asked is, what is dementia? And I think we'd like to explain it as a term that describes a group of symptoms having to do with memory loss and changes in behavior. That's kind of a broad definition. There are a number of dementias. Of course, Alzheimer's is the most prevalent dementia, and it affects memory, thinking, reasoning, and certainly there are changes in behaviors that go along with it. I think that one thing we want to remember is it is a degenerative brain disease. Currently, there's no cure, but they are working very hard on trying to find things to treat and also to hopefully cure that particular dementia. There are, of course, other dementias that people might be familiar with, Lewy body syndrome, Hicks disease, and others. And these may present differently. And so it's an excellent idea, of course, to have a neurological, a geropsychologist or a geropsych evaluate your care recipient, your loved one, to be sure that they can isolate and determine as best they are able which kind of dementia you might have. There are also, of course, things that might, what we would say, mimic different kinds of dementias. There are things such as depression. You might have a reaction to a medication. You may have an infection. Even such things as vitamin deficiencies and caregiver burnout, where a person's exhausted. And that affects our memory and, of course, can change many things in us that make us think that we're suffering from the same disease that our care recipient is suffering from. So we would like to suggest that there are things that you can do for yourself and certainly for your care recipient that might improve the situation, at least initially. There are medications that they suggest at times for Alzheimer's in particular, and they have to do with determining what stage the individual might be in. And this your doctor can help you with. I think, yes, please.
Are you referring to supporting the caregiver or the caregiver's recipient?
I think in this case, they do go hand in hand. It's a very good question. Whatever we can do to help the caregiver become more knowledgeable about what's happening with their care recipient, then the better we can, from our specialist point of view, from our caregiver program, we can help them address things, resources and the like, that are going to be helpful to them as they learn how to work with their care recipient and hopefully make things better or to address some of the problems that may arise, that often do arise, or decisions that they have to make about their care, and giving them a bit more confidence, we hope, too, in sort of, well, as they work along the journey that will be theirs and the support that they need. And so if you're talking about things and the idea of a treatment often comes up, there are certain medications that have been tried on individuals. Some respond, some do not, and they are suggested for certain stages. And so the caregiver could ask the doctor to address that issue to see if perhaps there is some improvement in language and skill sets. And I think that in some cases this does happen. It doesn't generally slow the progress of the disease, but at least it may give some immediate response. And actually, this is where knowing what kind of brain disorder you may have or your care recipient may have. And so the caregiver should try their very best, as we mentioned earlier, to find out what that care recipient is diagnosed with. And then, because certain medications are counterindicated for various kinds of other brain diseases. And so you'd want to narrow that down. I think also it happens that both the caregiver and the care recipient begin to isolate during these times. They particularly don't want to leave the house. Many times the caregiver does not, and sometimes the care recipient as well. They don't know how to act in public or how to feel comfortable in public and in different settings. And so our caregiver support rep and myself try to give them ideas and suggestions that might help them cross that barrier so that they're not just isolated with themselves and their caregiver on a regular basis. Now, we understand COVID has changed that quite a lot, and we no longer have adult day health, which is a service that helps with caregivers. That's quite a loss right now, and we're eager to see when that might come back on board. But I do think that this is an opportunity, and I would like to express the information and the resources available on Alzheimer's Association, their website. It is excellent. It's easy to maneuver, and they have even some COVID types of resources, things that you can do to prompt your mind to think about how you might construct a day, perhaps even, and think about things that you can do with your care recipient, and that's going to be something that the caregiver would know they like or dislike, and to sort of help give the caregiver some time away if they can engage the care recipient in an activity that is useful or helpful to them or distracting for them. Mm-hmm. And so I can't encourage them enough to try Alzheimer's Association to see what they have and how that might benefit them.
To you before about connecting socially and the importance of caregivers connecting, getting that social support. And I know there are resources on the senior care site for that, right?
Yes, there are. I think that right now we have a conference call that we like to use as support groups. We've had 3 support groups in the past, and they've met in Wenham and Beverly and here in Gloucester. And we have one now that's online. There's a telephone number that we can call, and you can call and ask us about that. I don't think it's up on one of our slides currently that we've given you, but we're happy to have you join in with that. We are working on trying to get a Zoom call ready, and it depends on what kind of technology that our caregivers have. But those who have joined that group feel, and our feedback has been that it's been very helpful. And once they get sort of used to how it works and exactly how to wait on the next person, the sort of technical aspects of it, I think it moves along very nicely and can be a real source of support. Mm-hmm. Our caregiver support specialist that you'll hear from later will actually try to make contact with folks during this time. She's available, I'm available if things come up. We also like to be able to have the care recipient evaluated as a potential home care client, because if that's the case, then senior care, the state agency for home care, can perhaps offer services in the home, and there are aides who do go in the home just now under one of the programs that the care recipient might qualify for, and that then hopefully would allow the caregiver to get a little bit of in-home respite, let's say, as someone else is coming in to help with some things. And that's very important. So you'd want us to call our information and referral department, or call if you're talking with Susan Dowdy or myself as an established caregiver, or just as perhaps a conversation you'd like to have, a casual conversation. We can go ahead and do a mini assessment. We call that, to see whether or not the recipient might be eligible for one of our programs. And we're delighted to be able to do that for them.
And what are some of the particular challenges that caregivers who are taking care of their loved ones with dementia, what are the more specific challenges there?
I think that's an excellent question. And one I hope you'll also ask Susan, because she has a lot of, I think, relevant stories. I believe some of the challenges have to do with understanding the problems, having the right assessment of what the care recipient is experiencing from day to day, learning how to be more observant, and also to relate that information to the doctors that you have on board. Mm-hmm. I think too that there are challenging behaviors, and they're different for each individual, and we're acquainted with most of them, and so can offer some suggestions for that. But I think that by and large, it's just having the resources and knowing how to access the resources, which we can help with, what's out there, and how does that address my particular problem, and how can I get in touch with that resource and utilize it. And then we also have some classes called Powerful Tools and Savvy Caregiver, for which we are both certified in. And we offer these a couple of times a year. They are for the caregiver. They are for the caregiver to increase their knowledge about the situation and also to have a good look at themselves and see how they can provide some respite for themselves, how they can be a better decision maker, how they can plan for the future. And I think that the end result of these is to make the caregiver more confident in how they're caring for their care recipient, for their loved one, and also to be prepared ahead for what's coming next. And so we're very glad. We've had a number of classes. They seem to be satisfying the need, and we will also continue with those.
Well, we look forward to talking to Susan Dowdy, the caregiver support specialist, and she will tell us in more. But anything else that you want to leave us with here?
I think we do have a program at Senior Care called the Dementia Friendly Massachusetts. And this is one of their goals is to educate the public and to help the community become better acquainted with aging in general, but dementia in particular. And we can give the information to get in touch with that program if anyone who perhaps doesn't even have a care recipient or someone who has a dementia, but if they're interested in knowing more about it, we can connect them with that program. And they have champions, they're called, once they're trained, and they can take that information back to their job sites, their communities, their agencies, whatever it is, and just be more familiar with how to deal with people in general who have this disease and how it affects their company or their restaurant or whatever service they might be delivering. And that's a very good outlet, I think, for people who don't have direct experience as a caregiver now, and most of us will in the future if we don't now. So I wanted to put a plug in for their program. It's been very successful thus far.
Well, we will make sure that gets posted also. So thank you so much for filling us in, and hopefully I know you are providing great services for all those caregivers out there, and hopefully we're helping to distribute that message.
Well, we're glad to be on. Thank you so much. Take care.
We have learned so much about the people that senior care are serving in this community, and this particular interview just felt really important because dementia and Alzheimer's are such complicated and difficult diseases to struggle with.
Yeah, and senior care brings it every time we talk to them. It's point. Here's how we can help. Here's how we can help. So great stuff there. Once again, thanks to the folks at Senior Care. Thanks to Erika Brown from the Manchester Cricket. Tomorrow we're speaking with Taylor Bradford from the Gloucester Daily Times. Have a great Monday.